Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into some recent commentary, quite pointed actually, on the U.S.-China relationship.
That's right. We're looking at the economic tensions, sure, but also the bigger picture of global power shifts.
And our main source here is an Oriental commentary from Xia Beilong, who's the director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office. This came out April 15th, 2025.
Yep. And we're also pulling in some related media coverage, a piece from Chatham House, and some domestic authoritative media reports to get a fuller picture.
So the mission for you listening is really to cut through the noise, get the key insights on how this whole landscape is changing.
Right. What are the core dynamics between the U.S. and China right now? Let's try and figure that out.
Okay, let's jump straight in. Xia Baolong kicks things off with a pretty provocative line. Let those bumpkins in the United States wail in the face of the 5,000-year-old Chinese civilization. Wow.
Yeah. That's blunt. It's definitely setting a tone, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Clearly a reaction to what China sees as U.S. attempts to hang on to global dominance.
It feels like more than just complaining, though. Is there a strategy behind language like that? So direct, almost, well, inflammatory.
I think so, yeah. It's projecting resilience, definitely. Rooting China's stance in this DOP history, suggesting it won't be easily pushed around by, American pressure.
A sort of historical confidence.
Exactly, and a clear rejection of any perceived Western looking down on them.
Okay, staying on that theme of resisting U.S. influence, there's this interesting piece from Chatham House, a senior researcher there.
Ah, yes, the one calling for the UK, EU, Japan to de-risk.
Right. De-risk their finance and AI sectors from the U.S. And the reason, U.S. uncertainty is apparently a bigger risk now than being dependent on China. That's quite a statement.
It really is a shift. The article goes so far as to call China an insurmountable and unavoidable wall blocking U.S. hegemony, especially financial hegemony.
So why now? What's driving this kind of thinking?
Well, the article itself links it pretty directly to the perceived failure of the Trump administration's tariff war.
Ah, okay. So the idea is the tariffs didn't work. And maybe worse, they showed how unpredictable U.S. policy can be.
Pretty much. Makes relying solely on the U.S. seem, well, riskier. And they even dropped that Kissinger quote in there, about it being dangerous to be America's enemy, but also dangerous to be its ally.
Suggests allies are feeling a need for more independence, maybe.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. Strategic autonomy.
So the tariff war failure, that seems central. The commentary we're looking at really hammers this point, suggesting China's response was a turning point.
It does. It talks about China's immediate and first response, this comprehensive and sharp counterattack. The argument is this showed China wouldn't just, take it.
Signaled a shift in power dynamics.
A shift from being reactive to being much more assertive, yes.
Now, the commentary also gets into what it thinks hurts Trump the most. It uses this analogy from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, comparing China's stance to Ma Su blocking Sima Yi. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Sure. So in the story, Ma Su's stubborn defense, even though it was ultimately flawed, successfully stalled Sima Yi's army. The comparison here is that China, by refusing to budge on trade, has created a kind of strategic stalemate.
Like digging in their heels has worked strategically.
In this view, yes. It's framing China's resilience through this well-known cultural story, presenting it as strategic steadfastness.
Interesting. Beyond the strategy, though, the commentary also raises alarm bells about time running out for the U.S. financially. It talks about internal problems and this potential vicious cycle.
Right. The cycle involving U.S. Treasury bonds.
Right.
The idea is if the U.S. keeps issuing lots of debt and demand maybe doesn't keep up, yields the interest rates have to go up.
Which makes borrowing more expensive for the U.S. government.
Exactly. And that can create pressure to, well, print more money to cover costs.
Yeah.
But doing that can weaken the dollar, maybe cause inflation.
Leading to more instability. A vicious cycle.
That's the potential danger highlighted, yes. The longer the tension goes on, the commentary suggests, the worse that cycle could get. Potentially even a systemic crisis.
Okay, let's pivot to the tariffs themselves. There's this domestic media report mentioned, titled something like, Making a Fuss About Tariff Hikes and Secretly Granting Exemptions Uncovering the Divine Moves of the U.S. Government.
Yeah, that piece focuses on this apparent contradiction. Publicly hiking tariffs, but then quietly granting exemptions, sometimes without much initial transparency.
Secret exemptions? How did that work?
Well, the report alleges exemptions were granted, and then maybe later reclassified or shifted into different tariff categories, like moving electronics exemptions into a semiconductor category.
So kind of fuzzy math on the tariffs suggests maybe an attempt to manage the blowback domestically while still trying to pressure China.
That's certainly the interpretation offered. Strategic ambiguity, perhaps.
And China's response to this.
Pretty firm, according to the commentary. China's Ministry of Commerce is quoted demanding a complete correction of the tariff war mistakes. Full stop.
Like no talking until that happens.
That's the message conveyed. The commentary says China sees this as non-negotiable. It even hints that if the U.S. doesn't fix the tariff issue, the whole strategic picture in the Western Pacific might shift maybe away from coexistence towards military accommodation.
Wow, that's serious.
It is, and the commentary frames it as the world watching the U.S. struggle with its own policies while China gains ground in setting economic rules.
This relates to Treasury Secretary Yellen's comments, too, doesn't it, about economic decoupling?
It does. The commentary notes Yellen said decoupling isn't inevitable, but, it's not impossible either.
How does the commentary interpret that?
It frames the Trump administration's decoupling threats and maybe implicitly lingering possibilities as sort of predictable. They actually quote Mao Zedong here.
No.
Yeah, the line about imperialist reactionaries creating trouble, failing, creating trouble again, failing again until destruction. It's casting the decoupling idea as a sign of desperation almost.
So the message is, China needs to be ready for the worst, but expects this kind of U.S. rhetoric.
Essentially, yes. Strategic preparation, but also a belief that these threats are part of a pattern of decline.
This all feels pretty tense. And then there's the issue of cyber warfare. Xie Belong's speech is described as mobilizing Hong Kong against potential U.S. economic actions. Why Hong Kong specifically?
Several reasons are given. One, if Chinese companies get delisted from U.S. exchanges, many might relist in Hong Kong, making it a richer target.
Okay, makes sense.
Two, the commentary points to Hong Kong's financial sector relying heavily on non-domestic operating systems. Potential vulnerabilities there.
Like Windows, maybe?
Potentially, yes. And third, the idea that lingering anti-China elements within Hong Kong could be exploited to make cyber disruptions worse.
And isn't there a specific incident mentioned? Something about the Harbin Public Security Bureau and NSA agents?
Yes, exactly. The commentary brings up arrest warrants issued for alleged U.S. NSA agents connected to cyber attacks during the Asian Winter Games.
What's the point of highlighting that specific case?
It serves to make the threat feel very real, not just theoretical. By mentioning alleged methods, encrypted data, potential backdoors in software, it underlines the perceived capability and intent behind such attacks.
Reinforcing the idea that Hong Kong is a key battleground or weak link in this cyber domain?
Precisely. And the underlying message is China's absolute resolve to protect Hong Kong from this kind of Western interference, as they see it.
So wrapping this part up, the commentary argues that, maybe counterintuitively, the tariff war actually boosted China's global position.
That's the core argument, yes, that it showed China could stand up to U.S. pressure, especially financial pressure, and emerged as a real counterweight to U.S. hegemony.
What proof do they offer for that?
Well, they point to China's economic resilience during the trade war itself, but also they highlight how some traditional U.S. allies are now looking to build stronger ties with China, hedging their bets, perhaps.
Right, like a hedge against U.S. unpredictability.
Exactly. The commentary even uses a quote attributed to former Secretary Blinken, admitting the tariff war hurt U.S. reliability and pushed countries away.
And we have seen examples like Argentina renewing its currency swap with China, even with President Milei initially being very anti-China.
Right. Pragmatism seems to win out there. And Brazil is another example, benefiting from shifted trade patterns, cooperating more with Chinese tech firms like Huawei and BYD.
That's interesting. The commentary also mentioned U.S. soybeans being shipped through Brazil to get around tariffs.
Yeah, a little bit of trade maneuvering. The suggestion is China knows this is happening and might even be using it as subtle leverage.
So the commentary basically leaves the Trump administration, or perhaps the U.S. more broadly, with two choices.
That's how it's framed.
Yeah.
Either confront China directly with all the risks that entails, or back down on the tariffs and focus on potential economic benefits through some kind of cooperation. A stark choice.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. This deep dive into the commentary paints a picture of, well, a pretty dramatic shift in the global order, doesn't it?
It certainly presents that perspective, yes. A U.S. seen as being in relative decline, its economic power challenged by a China that's portrayed as increasingly confident and assertive.
The tariff war acting as a catalyst, exposing vulnerabilities and making other countries rethink their positions.
Exactly. And then layered on top is this looming threat of cyber conflict, particularly focused on flashpoints like Hong Kong. It adds another level of complexity.
For you listening, hopefully this analysis gives you a clearer sense of these major forces shaping international relations and the economy. It's definitely a complex, interconnected world.
Absolutely. Understanding these different viewpoints, even if they're strongly argued like this commentary, is pretty crucial.
So here's something to maybe mull over. If we take this commentary's perspective seriously, this idea of declining U.S. hegemony and rising Chinese influence, what could the long-term consequences be? For global stability, for the financial system? Are there completely unforeseen ripple effects we haven't even considered yet?
Definitely food for thought. Lots to keep watching.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.